Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 1990 Brownlow Medal count, live from the Southern Cross Hotel's Australis room. Your host tonight, Bruce McAvaney.
And a warm welcome from Seven Sport to the 1990 Brownlow Medal. This is football showcase evening, the night that the greats in the game compete for the highest individual honour available. Well, Geelong centreman Paul Couch is the latest in a long list of champions to win the Brownlow Medal, and tonight, in about 2 hours' time, we'll be toasting another Brownlow winner. And will it be one of the favourites, one of the betting favourites or media favourites? Greg Anderson of Essendon, David Bain of the Brisbane Bears, John Longmire, who's been the subject of a remarkable plunge today all around Australia, of North Melbourne, Tony McGuinness of Footscray, or maybe Stewie Lowe from St Kilda? Or will it be an outsider who will join the legends of football? Well, it's my pleasure to welcome the man who will be calling the votes tonight, the chairman of the AFL Commission, Mr Ross Oakley.
Thanks, Bruce. Good evening and welcome to the 63rd counting of the Brownlow Medal. A special welcome to our Premier, the Honourable Joan Kerner, and her husband Ron. Welcome, Joan. Ron. May I also acknowledge the generosity of Mr Barry Fink, the Managing Director of the Southern Cross, and to the Australian Television Network for their kind support of this evening, together with the AFL corporate sponsors, Carlton United Breweries, represented tonight by Mr Pat Stone. Would you thank those people? Tonight is a properly constituted meeting of the AFL, with all club directors and alternates present. I'd like now to introduce the counting team to you. Mr Dean Moore, AFL Administration Executive and VMFL Secretary. Mr Don Handley, AFL Administration Manager. Mr Alan Swab, AFL Executive Commissioner. Mr Gary Clayton, VFL Park Manager. And Mr Mark Patterson, AFL Administration Executive and VCFL General Manager. In accordance with AFL Rule 19, at the conclusion of each match, the two field umpires conferred and recorded their idea of the three fairest and best players in each of the 154 home and away matches played. The votes were then sealed in an envelope marked Brownlow Medal. In the case of two or more players receiving an equal number of votes, each shall be declared the joint winner, and each of these players shall be awarded a Brownlow Medal. Any player who has been found guilty of an offence in a home and away match, except for a time-wasting offence, shall be ineligible to receive the medal. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, Ross. Well, the AFL auditors, the international accounting firm KPMG Pete Marwick, have again supervised the removal of the votes by the umpires from the vault at Armourguard, where they've been accumulating throughout the season. KPMG Pete Marwick have satisfied themselves that the correct number of votes have been cast and that they were intact on removal from the vault. They have remained with the votes all day to ensure that they are totally intact on arrival at the Southern Cross. KPMG Pete Marwick partners Paul Shannon and Doug Bartley are here tonight, and they've kept the votes under their scrutiny since the vault was opened early this evening. So much for those late leaks all around Australia. OK, everything's in order. We're ready to start the count, and we'll be back from the Southern Cross after this break. And welcome back to the Australis room of the Southern Cross Hotel. We're about to commence the count for the 1990 Brownlow Medal, and the vote will be conducted round by round in order, beginning with the very first way back in March through to round 22 on the weekend of August the 24th. And the big match on the opening day was at Waverley. It was a replay of the 1989 Grand Final, Hawthorn versus Geelong.
The AFL season was launched on a perfect autumn day. More than 41,000 fans were at VFL Park for the Grand Final replay, Hawthorn versus Geelong. For just over an hour, the two teams produced a magnificent contest. But then Hawthorn, and in particular Jason Dunstall, turned a battle into a massacre. Dunstall booted a dozen as the Hawks won by 115 points. In the close match of the round, Sydney gave Carlton a 45-point start at half-time before breaking a 25-year drought. Greg Williams finished the game a hero with 43 touches. At the MCG, Melbourne, led by Darren Bennett's 8 goals, cruised home against North, their winning margin 53 points. Essendon enjoyed an even bigger win, 81 points over a depleted Fitzroy at Windy Hill. Brisbane shrugged off their pre-season blues with a 10-goal victory against Richmond in a fiery encounter under lights at Carrara. On the Sunday, an all-in brawl didn't stop the West Coast Eagles from recording a 46-point win over Collingwood. Whilst the Saints upset Footscray's party at the Western Oval, the Bulldogs had survived a financial crisis but couldn't overcome St Kilda's man mountain Tony Lockett, who finished with a perfect 10.
Round 1, Hawthorn versus Geelong. Hawthorn, S. Lawrence, 1 vote. Hawthorn, D. Pritchard, 2 votes. Hawthorn, J. Dunstall, 3 votes. North Melbourne versus Melbourne. Melbourne, B. Wilson, 1 vote. Melbourne, S. Clark, 2 votes. Melbourne, D. Bennett, 3 votes. Carlton versus Sydney. Sydney, S. Wright, 1 vote. Carlton, T. Elvin, 2 votes. Sydney, G. Williams, 3 votes. Essendon versus Fitzroy. Essendon, A. Ezard, 1 vote. Essendon, A. Manning, 2 votes. Essendon, G. Anderson, 3 votes. Brisbane versus Richmond. Brisbane, B. Rowe, 1 vote. Richmond, M. Mitchell, 2 votes. Brisbane, M. Zanotti, 3 votes. West Coast versus Collingwood. West Coast, P. Scott, 1 vote. West Coast, P. Wilson, 2 votes. West Coast, T. Ugle, 3 votes. Footscray versus St Kilda. St Kilda, R. Jeffrey, 1 vote. St Kilda, T. Lockett, 2 votes. St Kilda, D. Rice, 3 votes.
The round began under lights, with North Melbourne handing the Tigers a record 141-point hiding at the MCG, and John Longmire booting a record 11 goals. The Blues lost their second successive game when outpointed by the Woods at league headquarters, while Tony Lockett booted a further 9 goals as the Saints overpowered the Eagles by 58 points. Reigning Premier Hawthorn caved in to a top-class Essendon side, while first-round losers Fitzroy were too good for the Brisbane Bears at Princes Park. And in the upset of the round, Footscray surprised Sydney by 62 points at the SCG.
Round 2, Richmond versus North Melbourne. North Melbourne, T. Rock, 1 vote. North Melbourne, P. German, 2 votes. North Melbourne, J. Longmire, 3 votes. Carlton versus Collingwood. Carlton, S. Minton Connell, 1 vote. Collingwood, G. Brown, 2 votes. Collingwood, P. Dacos, 3 votes. Melbourne versus Geelong. Melbourne, D. Bennett, 1 vote. Melbourne, B. Lovett, 2 votes. Melbourne, J. Steins, 3 votes. Fitzroy versus Brisbane. Fitzroy, M. Armstrong, 1 vote. Fitzroy, M. Rendell, 2 votes. Fitzroy, R. Lyon, 3 votes. St Kilda versus West Coast. St Kilda, T. Lockett, 1 vote. St Kilda, T. Pekin, 2 votes. St Kilda, S. Lowe, 3 votes. Sydney versus Footscray. Footscray, P. Foster, 1 vote. Footscray, T. Liberatore, 2 votes. Footscray, T. McGuinness, 3 votes. Essendon versus Hawthorn. Essendon, A. Danaher, 1 vote. Essendon, G. Anderson, 2 votes. Essendon, T. Watson, 3 votes.
Round 3, and Carlton finally opened their account against St Kilda at VFL Park, with Craig Bradley inspirational across the centre and Stephen Silvani holding spearhead Tony Lockett to just 2 goals. Hawthorn trailed at half-time, but managed a late surge to down an enthusiastic Richmond at Princes Park, while Mick Malthouse returned to the Western Oval with the Eagles to run out easy winners by 63 points. North Melbourne went north to Carrara and outmuscled the Bears in the wet, while the match of the day on Monday, Melbourne and Essendon, both undefeated, saw the Demons far too strong, but paid a huge price by losing new recruit Stephen Clark with a knee injury.
Round 3, St Kilda versus Carlton. Carlton, C. Bradley, 1 vote. Carlton, A. Bassett, 2 votes. Carlton, S. Silvani, 3 votes. Hawthorn versus Richmond. Richmond, M. Pickering, 1 vote. Hawthorn, J. Platten, 2 votes. Hawthorn, J. Dunstall, 3 votes. Footscray versus West Coast. West Coast, P. Sumich, 1 vote. West Coast, K. Langdon, 2 votes. West Coast, D. Laidley, 3 votes. Brisbane versus North Melbourne. North Melbourne, J. Longmire, 1 vote. Brisbane, D. Bain, 2 votes. North, M. Hepburn, 3 votes. Melbourne versus Essendon. Melbourne, S. O'Dwyer, 1 vote. Melbourne, A. Obst, 2 votes. Melbourne, G. Yates, 3 votes. Geelong versus Fitzroy. Geelong, G. Ablett, 1 vote. Geelong, R. Sterrett, 2 votes. Geelong, B. Brownless, 3 votes. Collingwood versus Sydney. Sydney, D. Carroll, 1 vote. Collingwood, G. Krasiska, 2 votes. Collingwood, G. Wright, 3 votes.
Round 4 started in Perth on the Friday night, with a record crowd of over 28,000 seeing the Eagle swamp Carlton by 50 points, set up by Dwayne Lamb's stopping job on Craig Bradley. On Saturday night in the wet in Melbourne, Essendon thrashed Richmond and Hawthorn demolished the Bears in one-sided games. Jason Dunstall kicked 8 goals. Melbourne remained unbeaten, coming from behind at half-time to beat Fitzroy. Tony Shaw had 34 possessions and Peter Dacos kicked 6 goals in Collingwood's 3-goal win over Footscray. On the Sunday, Geelong regained form and ran away from North Melbourne to reverse their Foster's Cup result. Gary Ablett kicked 7. And the Sydney Swans suffered their 3rd defeat in succession, unable to hold St Kilda in Sydney. Greg Williams broke his thumb to worsen the day. Russell Jeffrey continued to star in his return to league football with 32 possessions.
Round 4, West Coast versus Carlton. West Coast, P. Wilson, 1 vote. West Coast, S. Malaxis, 2 votes. West Coast, D. Lamb, 3 votes. Fitzroy versus Melbourne. Melbourne, A. Obst, 1 vote. Fitzroy, R. Lyon, 2 votes. Melbourne, G. Lyon, 3 votes. Richmond versus Essendon. Essendon, M. Thompson, 1 vote. Essendon, P. Salmon, 2 votes. Essendon, T. Danaher, 3 votes. Hawthorn versus Brisbane. Hawthorn, P. Swab, 1 vote. Hawthorn, G. Ayres, 2 votes. Hawthorn, A. Collins, 3 votes. Collingwood versus Footscray. Collingwood, G. Krasiska, 1 vote. Footscray, L. Cameron, 2 votes. Collingwood, P. Dacos, 3 votes. Sydney versus St Kilda. St Kilda, N. Winmar, 1 vote. St Kilda, R. Jeffrey, 2 votes. St Kilda, S. Lowe, 3 votes. North Melbourne versus Geelong. North Melbourne, W. Swass, 1 vote. Geelong, P. Couch, 2 votes. Geelong, B. Brownless, 3 votes.
So pretty interesting here with 4 players on 6 votes at the moment. Brownless, Dunstall, Dacos and Lowe, and a number of the favourites doing very well. Back with more from the Southern Cross after the break. Welcome back to 7 Sports telecast of the 1990 Brownlow Medal. Well, after 4 rounds, Melbourne was the only undefeated team. Essendon was in 2nd position, West Coast 5th, and Collingwood out of the 5 on percentage. Round 5 was played over 3 rounds. It was the Anzac Day long weekend, and one match in particular was unforgettable. It was at the MCG between Collingwood and St Kilda, and it brought back some memories from that grand final in 1966.
The Tigers have fond memories of round 5. They recorded their first win of the season, thrashing Fitzroy by 79 points at the MCG to break a 12-game losing drought. Fighting Footscray had cause for celebration on Anzac Day. Led by Tony Liberatore and exciting new forward Chris Grant, the Dogs outpointed Carlton at Princes Park. 70,000 fans packed the MCG for the much-publicised Collingwood-St Kilda clash, and they weren't disappointed. The Magpies could have wrapped the game up in the second quarter, and they booted 1 goal 8. The Saints, however, stayed with them, and at the final siren, there was only 1 point the difference in Collingwood's favour. Peter Sumich continued his form up front for the Eagles. He kicked 8 in his team's 61-point demolition of Sydney. Melbourne was just as convincing in their win over the Bears at Carrara. Geelong got going after a slow start to the season. Cats beat the Bombers by 8 points at Waverley. And at Princes Park, Hawthorn beat North Melbourne by 30 points, but not without a scare. Ace forward Dermot Brereton was charged with kicking, but was later cleared by the AFL tribunal.
Round 5. Richmond versus Fitzroy. Richmond, M. Knights, 1 vote. Richmond, C. Lambert, 2 votes. Richmond, T. Powell, 3 votes. Carlton versus Footscray. Footscray, S. Wallace, 1 vote. Footscray, G. Coleman, 2 votes. Footscray, T. Liberatore, 3 votes. Essendon versus Geelong. Essendon, P. Salmon, 1 vote. Geelong, R. Scott, 2 votes. Geelong, A. Buse, 3 votes. Hawthorn versus North Melbourne. Hawthorn, D. Anderson, 1 vote. Hawthorn, R. Morris, 2 votes. Hawthorn, A. Condon, 3 votes. St Kilda versus Collingwood. St Kilda, D. Rice, 1 vote. St Kilda, D. Frawley, 2 votes. Collingwood, G. Wright, 3 votes. Brisbane versus Melbourne. Melbourne, E. Spalding, 1 vote. Melbourne, B. Lovett, 2 votes. Melbourne, D. Bennett, 3 votes. West Coast versus Sydney. West Coast, P. Sumich, 1 vote. West Coast, D. Lamb, 2 votes. West Coast, B. Heady, 3 votes.
The round began under lights on the Friday when the West Coast Eagles defeated Richmond. their first win on the MCG, and by so doing, going to the top of the ladder for the first time. At the same venue the next day, the Bombers brought Collingwood's winning run to an end, while at Moorabbin, St Kilda had a win over Hawthorn for the first time in 11 years. Footscray had an easy win over former merger prospect Fitzroy at VFL Park, while the Cats had no trouble in downing an injury-depleted Bears combination. Biggest upset of the round, however, occurred on Sunday. The out-of-form Swans won a thriller against league leaders Melbourne, their first defeat for the year.
Round 6. Richmond versus West Coast. West Coast, D. Lamb, 1 vote. West Coast, D. Laidley, 2 votes. West Coast, S. Malaxos, 3 votes. Footscray versus Fitzroy. Footscray, T. Wallace, 1 vote. Footscray, D. Hawkins, 2 votes. Footscray, T. Liberatore, 3 votes. Carlton versus North Melbourne. Carlton, G. Hawker, 1 vote. North Melbourne, A. Rock, 2 votes. Carlton, P. Meldrum, 3 votes. Geelong versus Brisbane. Geelong, P. Couch, 1 vote. Geelong, D. Morgan, 2 votes. Geelong, A. Buse, 3 votes. St Kilda versus Hawthorn. Hawthorn, D. Anderson, 1 vote. St Kilda, D. Rice, 2 votes. St Kilda, P. Harding, 3 votes. Collingwood versus Essendon. Essendon, T. Danaher, 1 vote. Essendon, D. Kickett, 2 votes. Essendon, P. Salmon, 3 votes. Sydney versus Melbourne. Melbourne, A. Obst, 1 vote. Melbourne, S. Phoebe, 2 votes. Sydney, D. Carroll, 3 votes.
Round 7 provided a series of upsets, with the bottom 3 winning and 3 of last year's finalists losing. Melbourne won the battle for top position from the West Coast Eagles on the Friday night. Come Saturday, and Hawthorn withstood a determined comeback by Collingwood to win by 2 points. Paul Deere playing his best game for the Hawks, and Graham Wright again in superb form for the Pies. Carlton upset Essendon at Windy Hill, with Silvani and Bradley playing starring roles. Fitzroy, after sacking its chairman of selectors and surviving rumours of the demise of coach and captain, regrouped to down St Kilda, the Saints' 25th loss in a row at Princes Park. Footscray won their 3rd game in a row against a disappointing North Melbourne by 2 points. On Sunday, the upsets continued as the Brisbane Bears bounced back from 5 successive defeats to beat the Sydney Swans. Cameron O'Brien kicking 7. And Richmond defied all odds to beat Geelong, the Cats kicking an abysmal 9 goals, 28.
Round 7. Melbourne versus West Coast. Melbourne, B. Lovett, 1 vote. Melbourne, S. Icehold, 2 votes. Melbourne, G. Yates, 3 votes. Collingwood versus Hawthorn. Hawthorn, R. Di Domenico, 1 vote. Collingwood, G. Wright, 2 votes. Hawthorn, P. Deere, 3 votes. North Melbourne versus Footscray. North Melbourne, P. German, 1 vote. Footscray, T. Liberatore, 2 votes. North Melbourne, A. Rock, 3 votes. Fitzroy versus St Kilda. Fitzroy, D. Kapler, 1 vote. Fitzroy, M. Armstrong, 2 votes. Fitzroy, J. Ironmonger, 3 votes. Essendon versus Carlton. Essendon, P. Salmon, 1 vote. Carlton, C. Bradley, 2 votes. Carlton, S. Silvani, 3 votes. Brisbane versus Sydney. Brisbane, B. Rowe, 1 vote. Brisbane, R. Merritt, 2 votes. Brisbane, A. Ishenko, 3 votes. Geelong versus Richmond. Geelong, A. Buse, 1 vote. Richmond, T. Nichols, 2 votes. Richmond, T. Powell, 3 votes.
The Blue Blitz continued in round 8 as Carlton humiliated reigning champions Hawthorn to the tune of 67 points. Collingwood had not won at Princes Park since 1981. It wasn't until the Magpies beat Fitzroy there by 45 points in round 8. The Sydney Swans overcame an emotional week. Defying all odds, they came out and beat Geelong by 9 points in a thriller. The Swans were rank outsiders to win the game. After all, players and coach Cole Kinnear were forced to take pay cuts during the week. St Kilda kept on course for a September appointment by disposing of North Melbourne, but at a price. The Saints lost key forward Tony Lockett with a knee injury. Melbourne managed to hold top spot on the ladder after beating Richmond by 53 points. Full forward Darren Bennett kept the ton in his sights with a bag of 6 goals. Over in Perth, the Eagles kept their winning sequence intact, easily accounting for the Brisbane Bears. Footscray, on the other hand, could not win at home. The Dogs went down to Essendon to lose their 3rd home game of the season.
Round 8, Sydney versus Geelong. Geelong, B. Brownless, 1 vote. Sydney, B. Mitchell, 2 votes. Sydney, D. Murphy, 3 votes. Carlton versus Hawthorn. Carlton, A. Gleeson, 1 vote. Carlton, M. Hanna, 2 votes. Carlton, D. Glascott, 3 votes. Melbourne versus Richmond. Richmond, M. Knights, 1 vote. Melbourne, B. Lovett, 2 votes. Melbourne, A. Lovell, 3 votes. Fitzroy versus Collingwood. Collingwood, S. Morwood, 1 vote. Fitzroy, M. Dundas, 2 votes. Collingwood, A. Shaw, 3 votes. St Kilda versus North Melbourne. St Kilda, D. Frawley, 1 vote. St Kilda, B. Bowie, 2 votes. St Kilda, P. Harding, 3 votes. West Coast versus Brisbane. West Coast, G. McKenna, 1 vote. West Coast, B. Heady, 2 votes. Brisbane, D. Bain, 3 votes. Footscray versus Essendon. Footscray, T. Liberatore, 1 vote. Essendon, D. Grenvold, 2 votes. Essendon, P. Cransberg, 3 votes.
So Tony Liberatore leading by 3 votes at the moment, with 11 from Graham Wright on 8 and 5 players on 7. And when we think of Tony Liberatore, we think about the little things in football that make the game such a joy to watch. Often throughout a season, it's the little things that turn the serious into something much more humorous.
Little things that you do make me glad I'm in love with you. Little things that you say make me glad that I feel this way. The way you smile, the way you hold my hand, and when I'm down, you always understand. You know I love those little things in my ear that you say when there's no one near. Little things that you do, let me know that your love is true. When we walk
Welcome back to the Southern Cross, the 1990 Brownlow Medal, and Tony Liberatore of Footscray leading at this stage after 8 rounds by 3 votes on 11. Well, between rounds 8 and 9, New South Wales pulled off one of the big upsets by beating Victoria at the Sydney Cricket Ground. But as the AFL moved into round 9, Melbourne was on top, Collingwood still out of the 5 on percentage, and Tony Lockett had booted 52 goals in his first 8 games, but was out of business with a serious knee injury. And another great full forward, was also about to suffer a major setback.
Round 9 was highlighted by a number of sensational incidents. A long list of the biggest names in football were reported, and Jason Dunstall suffered a shocking head injury. Ironically, Hawthorn climbed off the mat to score one of its greatest victories over league leaders Melbourne, with Dunstall and Brereton out of action. Carlton continued to gain momentum, coming from 4 goals behind Fitzroy at half-time to record their 4th consecutive victory. Their arch-rivals Collingwood broke back into the 5 with a crushing last-quarter effort against North. The Bombers won the most entertaining match of the round against St Kilda at Windy Hill. The game was played at a frantic pace and featured a collection of the season's outstanding goals. At Carrara, the Bulldogs relegated the Bears to the bottom of the ladder. The Tigers climbed 4 places and moved to 10th, bringing Sydney down with a thud, whilst West Coast made it 5 out of 5 in Perth as they shook off Geelong, who were in a depressed state following their 3rd consecutive defeat.
Round 9. Hawthorn versus Melbourne. Melbourne, B. Lovett, 1 vote. Hawthorn, J. Platten, 2 votes. Hawthorn, A. Collins, 3 votes. Carlton versus Fitzroy. Carlton, C. Bradley, 1 vote. Carlton, P. Meldrum, 2 votes. Carlton, A. Bassett, 3 votes. Collingwood versus North Melbourne. Collingwood, P. Dacos, 1 vote. Collingwood, G. Brown, 2 votes. Collingwood, M. McGuan, 3 votes. Essendon versus St Kilda. St Kilda, R. Harvey, 1 vote. Essendon, A. Izzard, 2 votes. St Kilda, B. Bowie, 3 votes. Brisbane versus Footscray. Footscray, T. Wallace, 1 vote. Footscray, T. Liberatore, 2 votes. Footscray, T. McGuinness, 3 votes. West Coast versus Geelong. Geelong, A. Fletcher, 1 vote. Geelong, D. Flanagan, 2 votes. West Coast, C. Mainwaring, 3 votes. Richmond versus Sydney. Richmond, T. Powell, 1 vote. Richmond, B. Young, 2 votes. Richmond, D. Cloak, 3 votes.
Round 10 saw the Roos come out at night and severely dent the Eagles' finals aspirations. John Longmire was again amongst the goals, bagging 8, as North coasted to a 28-point victory. Collingwood stamped itself as a real finals contender, thrashing Melbourne by 52 points. Almost 32,000 fans journeyed to the MCG to see David Cloak notch up his 300th game. They also saw the young Tigers at their best as they carved up Carlton to the tune of 23 points. Fitzroy notched up its 3rd win of the season, upsetting Hawthorn by 14 points. The loss cost the Hawks their place in the 5. Brisbane, however, slid to the bottom of the ladder after being hammered by St Kilda at Moorabbin. Even without ace full forward Tony Lockett, the Saints won by 77 points. Essendon recorded the biggest win of the round and in doing so moved to the top of the AFL ladder. Led by Tim Watson, who booted 6 goals, the Bombers blitzed the Sydney Swans by 90 points. While the closest game of the round was at Cardinia Park. Inspired by the return of Gary Ablett, the Cats won a thriller against Footscray by 2 points.
Round 10. North Melbourne versus West Coast. North Melbourne, M. Gallagher, 1 vote. North Melbourne, J. Longmire, 2 votes. North Melbourne, J. Ramiro, 3 votes. Collingwood versus Melbourne. Collingwood, S. Morwood, 1 vote. Collingwood, P. Dacos, 2 votes. Collingwood, M. McGuan, 3 votes. Richmond versus Carlton. Richmond, M. Knights, 1 vote. Richmond, T. Nichols, 2 votes. Richmond, M. Mitchell, 3 votes. Fitzroy versus Hawthorn. Fitzroy, G. Pert, 1 vote. Fitzroy, M. Dundas, 2 votes. Hawthorn, J. Platten, 3 votes. St Kilda versus Brisbane. St Kilda, P. Harding, 1 vote. Brisbane, D. Bain, 2 votes. St Kilda, F. Coghlan, 3 votes. Sydney versus Essendon. Essendon, S. Madden, 1 vote. Essendon, T. Watson, 2 votes. Essendon, P. Vanderhaar, 3 votes. Geelong versus Footscray. Geelong, N. Bruns, 1 vote. Footscray, M. Hogg, 2 votes. Footscray, S. Wind, 3 votes.
So no votes there for Tony Liberatore in round 10, but he still leads by 4 votes from Peter Dacos on 9, with Graham Wright and Brett Lovett on 8. 10 rounds down, still 12 to go in the 1990 Brownlow Medal. Well, the Brownlow Medal is the one night where people from all areas of footy can get together and renew friendships. But sadly tonight, one friend of football isn't with us. For more than a decade, Jack Hamilton, in his unique fashion, has left his mark on the Brownlow Medal count.
The way your smile just beams, the way you sing off key, the way you haunt my dreams. No, no, they can't take that away from me.
At the conclusion of each match in the home and away series, the field umpires conferred and lodged votes, in their opinion, the 3 best players on the ground. Earlier today, they were placed in a steel container, and that container will be delivered here. I think it will be delivered here. More dramatic if we shot it off with a gun.
Although the Brownlow Medal has always been an official league meeting, Jack's brand of humour came shining through.
Well, in 1980, Chris Smith of Fitzroy was leading the votes as we went to the last commercial break. In that period, we've got 20 votes to go. I said to Jack Hamilton, we've got a disaster here. He said, why? I said, well, Chris Smith of Fitzroy's leading, he hasn't been invited. I said, can you see if he's got any more votes? And the 20 that Jack was holding. With a wink and a smile, Jack said, none so long as I'm calling them.
Hello, Jennifer Kite, looking ahead to our late news in Tonight Live.
Welcome back to the Southern Cross. Tony Liberatore leading Peter Dacos by 4 votes after 10 rounds in the 1990 season. So we get to round 11, the Queen's Birthday long weekend.
In contrast to last year's Queen's Birthday weekend weather, ideal conditions brought out the crowds. 47,500 saw the Cats hold out St Kilda by 8 points at Waverley. While at Windy Hill, Paul Salmon booted 6 as the Eagles again crashed against the Bombers. Hawthorn got back on the winning list by 49 points at the expense of the injury-hit Sydney Swans, John Platten bagging 5. Collingwood had no trouble accounting for the Brisbane Bears on the Gold Coast. Just under 60,000 crammed into the MCG on the Monday to see Melbourne hold out the Blues by 6 points, after early in the third quarter leading by 55. Nailey, Steve Kernahan and Demon rookie Brent Heaver all booted 5. 30,000 fans packed the Western Oval to watch the Bulldogs win their first home game against a spirited Richmond, while North made it 2 in a row against Fitzroy at Princes Park.
Round 11, St Kilda versus Geelong. Geelong, D. Russell, 1 vote. St Kilda, P. Harding, 2 votes. Geelong, B. Brownless, 3 votes. Hawthorn versus Sydney. Sydney, B. Mitchell, 1 vote. Hawthorn, C. Langford, 2 votes. Hawthorn, J. Platten, 3 votes. Essendon versus West Coast. Essendon, A. Danaher, 1 vote. Essendon, M. Thompson, 2 votes. Essendon, P. Salmon, 3 votes. Brisbane versus Collingwood. Collingwood, C. Starshevich, 1 vote. Brisbane, D. Bain, 2 votes. Collingwood, T. Shaw, 3 votes. Melbourne versus Carlton. Melbourne, B. Lovett, 1 vote. Carlton, C. Bradley, 2 votes. Carlton, M. Nailey, 3 votes. Fitzroy versus North Melbourne. Fitzroy, J. Wynd, 1 vote. North Melbourne, S. Hamilton, 2 votes. North Melbourne, J. Chandler, 3 votes. Footscray versus Richmond. Footscray, T. McGuinness, 1 vote. Footscray, P. Foster, 2 votes. Footscray, L. Cameron, 3 votes.
Round 12 started with the West Coast Eagles continuing a run which started last year, winning their 11th successive match in Perth. But Hawthorn retained a place in the 5. The Saints missed the chance to replace them when they succumbed to Richmond's improved form, forward Barry Young winning the most possessions. In the match of the day, Collingwood notched their 5th win in succession. Captain Tony Shaw celebrating his state selection with another best-on-ground performance. Wayne Johnston returned for his first match since round 1 and starred for the Blues against the hapless Bears. Another player who missed a lot of football through injury is Essendon's Mark Harvey. In only his 19th match in 3 seasons, he was best of field in the Bombers' 5-goal win over North Melbourne. Melbourne dented Footscray's recent good run, Darren Bennett's 5 goals taking him past the 50 mark for the season. And Sydney lost their 4th successive match, managing only 10 goals against a Fitzroy defence led by Gary Pert and Brett Stevens.
Round 12, West Coast versus Hawthorn. West Coast, B. Heady, 1 vote. Hawthorn, A. Collins, 2 votes. West Coast, G. McKenna, 3 votes. Geelong versus Collingwood. Collingwood, D. Monkhurst, 1 vote. Geelong, D. Morgan, 2 votes. I beg your pardon, that's... right, sorry. Collingwood, Collingwood, T. Shaw, 3 votes. Richmond versus St Kilda. Richmond, M. Lee, 1 vote. Richmond, T. Nichols, 2 votes. Richmond, B. Young, 3 votes. Carlton versus Brisbane. Carlton, A. Bassett, 1 vote. Carlton, S. Kernahan, 2 votes. Carlton, J. Madden, 3 votes. Essendon versus North Melbourne. Essendon, P. Salmon, 1 vote. Essendon, D. Buick, 2 votes. North Melbourne, D. Crocker, 3 votes. Sydney versus Fitzroy. Fitzroy, B. Stevens, 1 vote. Fitzroy, J. Ironmonger, 2 votes. Fitzroy, G. Pert, 3 votes. Footscray versus Melbourne. Footscray, L. Cameron, 1 vote. Melbourne, D. Bennett, 2 votes. Melbourne, A. Johnson, 3 votes.
So Tony Liberatore still leading by 2 votes from Paul Salmon, but 9 players now within 4 votes of one another after 12 rounds of the 1990 Brownlow season. So we're into the second half now, and it's starting to get very, very interesting. A couple of the favourites, David Bain's been struggling a bit, and also Greg Anderson. As we take a look at the team leaderboards, and so we start with the Brisbane Bears, David Bain with 9, and he does do very well between rounds 13 and 16. That's coming up after the break. Zanotti, Yashenko, Rowe and Merritt on 2. To Carlton, and the leader there is Silvani with Bradley and Bassett, each with 6. Kernahan just with 2 there. At Collingwood, a number of players polling well, as you'd expect. Dacos and Shaw both with 9, Wright with 8 and McGuan with 6. At Essendon, Salmon the leader there with 11. Anderson with 5. As I said, he had a terrific run between rounds 13 and 16. Watson with 5. At Fitzroy, Lyon, Ironmonger, both 5. Ironmonger ineligible, and then Dundas and Pert with 4. We go to Footscray, and this is where the leader is. Tony Liberatore with 13. Tony McGuinness with 7. And no Terry Wallace there for Footscray. At Geelong, Paul Couch was a winner last year. Bill Brownlow this year with 10. Buse 7, who was injured for most of the year. Morgan with 4. At Hawthorn, John Platten doing very well. Didn't seem like 1990 was his best season, but Platts is there with 10. Andy Collins with 8. Dunstall with 6. Jason out for a lot of the year with that injury. At Melbourne, Brett Lovett doing well, and so is Darren Bennett. They've both got 9 each. And Graham Yates with 6. At North Melbourne, this was the plunge horse today, John Longmire. But he's with, it's Rock, Longmire, both 6, and then Hepburn, German, Ramiro and Chandler. At Richmond, Powell, who played very well in that interstate game when New South Wales won, at 7. Nichols with 6. At St Kilda, Stewie Lowe was one of the favourites, but Paul Harding with 9, Lowe 6 and Rice 6, Bowie at 5, Tony Lockett with 3. At Sydney, Dennis Carroll leading there with 4, Williams, Murphy and Mitchell. And at West Coast, for our friends in Perth there, Lamb 6, Heady 6 and Laidley and Malaxos 5. So we take a look at the leaders board, and Tony Liberatore leading by 2 from Paul Salmon. Bill Brownless, John Platten both with 10, and then a number of players on 9. Dacos, Harding, Bain and Lovett. OK, once every 4 weeks, Sandy Roberts has presented during the year the plays of the month. This is a mix of the most outrageous incidents both on and on the field. Well, for tonight, we've put a best of together and we've called it the plays of the year.
Footy fans have had an absolute feast this season, and there's still more to come. Don't worry, Jeansy, we're fine for time. Mind you, Jezza may miss his three-quarter time address if he doesn't hurry up and open that gate. The year produced some sensational shirt fronts and bumps. There was Anthony Danaher and Trevor Paul, Magpie Darren Mullane and Bomber Michael Werner. Mullane again, this time up against Hawthorn's Chris Whitman. Footscray's Tony McGuinness is quick, but on this occasion the Saints' Dean Rice was quicker, and that's one of the tackles of the year. And while that one didn't miss, this one did. Wait a minute, Dominic, that's an Actors Equity con. Come the month of May and supporters were in full cry. Well, most of them were. Geelong's David Cameron did his best to make the morning papers, but come on, David, you have to be in front of the camera. The SCG produces its own special personalities. Apart from the umpires, there are the shapely Swan Tits, and of course the legendary Witches of Randwick.
Pete, I believe already they've made a prediction.
Yes, the one on the left in the purple tights has made a prediction that Don will miss the 6 o'clock plane and go back to her place.
It was a struggle, but David Cloak finally did it. He joined the 300 club. But an even greater struggle was getting through the banner. Well done, Cloaky. But isn't football an emotional game? Question, when is a goal not a goal? Well, all we can say to David Honeybun in answering that question, when the goal umpire signals are behind. Yes, David, I think you're a bit stiff. And while that one got away, here's one that didn't. But come on, Dipper, isn't that taking close checking to extremes? And then, of course, there was the goal umpire under more pressure than usual. A group of Blues supporters thought he'd be a good target for some peanut throwing. But hang on, guys, I think that party trick is about to come to an end. In State of Origin footy, it was a case of third time lucky for the Big V, and wasn't Chairman of Selectors Ted Whitten delighted? Or perhaps relieved would be a better word.
Stuck it right up them! That's what you did. You stuck it right up them! Oh, what a bloody release.
Togetherness in football was very evident this season. Players like Chris Grant and Tony Liberatore were very close. Even opponents were anxious to share. Here for a drink, Danny? No thanks, Justin, but have some of mine. And then, of course, there were the Siamese Blue supporters joined at the beanie. Tackling has become an art form, and if you dispute that, just ask Bernard Toohey, or better still, Mil Hannah. After all, he didn't have the ball. Clubs these days like to impose media bans on their players, but surely this is taking things a little too far. The cheer squads do a great job, just ask Don Scott. West Coast whingers, we are not. Do the world a favour, get rid of Don Scott. Scotty, when you gotta go, you've gotta go. That wasn't the only cheer given this year, if you'll pardon the pun. Fitzroy's Glenn Coleman is now affectionately known as the Legend of Greystoke. Hardly surprising after this feat. Mind you, the replacement's a bit of a worry. And so as the 1990 season draws to a close, perhaps we should all give thanks for a sensational year.
Who can you bang? Hope you're enjoying Seven Sports telecast of the 1990 Brownlow Medal. The last couple of years, Gerard Healy won in '88 with 20 votes. Last year, Paul Gouch with 22. Liberatore already on 13. We go to round 13, and this was highlighted by a Carlton comeback.
With interstate football in full swing, the round was split, and in a thriller at Princess Park, Carlton at the main change trailed by 7 goals. But in a third-term blitz, marched all over Geelong to eventually win by 19 points. St Kilda went in as underdogs but came out smiling against Melbourne at the MCG, with Stuart Lowe marking everything, the Saints by 33 points. In a lacklustre affair under lights up at Carrara, the Bombers totally outpointed the Bears by 9 goals, cementing their position as league leaders. In front of a packed home crowd, Collingwood won their 6th game on the trot with a convincing display against the improved Tigers, while North Melbourne destroyed the Swans by 90 points, with the young Wayne Carey snaring 7. As history shows, the Eagles are difficult to stop over in the West, and Fitzroy became their 7th victim this year, failing by 37 points. And in a complete shock at VFL Park, Footscray chalked up their 7th win, accounting for Hawthorn, last year's premiers, by 3 goals.
Round 13. Melbourne versus St Kilda. St Kilda, C. Devonport, 1 vote. St Kilda, B. Bowie, 2 votes. St Kilda, S. Lowe, 3 votes. Carlton versus Geelong. Geelong, T. Malakalis, 1 vote. Carlton, I. Herman, 2 votes. Carlton, D. Fotier, 3 votes. Brisbane versus Essendon. Essendon, P. Cransberg, 1 vote. Essendon, M. Long, 2 votes. Essendon, S. Madden, 3 votes. Hawthorn versus Footscray. Footscray, G. Coleman, 1 vote. Footscray, T. McGuinness, 2 votes. Footscray, T. Wallace, 3 votes. North Melbourne versus Sydney. North Melbourne, M. Larkin, 1 vote. North Melbourne, W. Carey, 2 votes. North Melbourne, P. Bryce, 3 votes. Collingwood versus Richmond. Collingwood, T. Francis, 1 vote. Collingwood, S. Russell, 2 votes. Collingwood, D. Mullane, 3 votes. West Coast versus Fitzroy. West Coast, P. Wilson, 1 vote. West Coast, P. Sumich, 2 votes. Fitzroy, P. Ruse, 3 votes.
Richmond small men Trent Nichols and Matthew Knight continued their great form as the Tigers thrashed the Bears to sour Roger Merritt's 200th game. Jason Dunster was back in a helmet and Dermot Brereton back from suspension as Hawthorn walloped Geelong for the 2nd time for the season. Essendon and Collingwood skipped 2 games clear, the Bombers beating Fitzroy, who had Richard Osman playing his first game for 11 months, and Collingwood accounting for the Eagles, with Darren Mullane and Tony Shaw a chance to build on their votes tally. John Longmire kicked an amazing 14 goals in North's total of 31 against a very disappointing Melbourne. Pocket dynamo Tony Liberatore continued his fine season with a starring role for Footscray, who upset St Kilda at Moorabbin. And Carlton atoned for their first round defeat by swamping the Swans with a 16-goal second half in Sydney.
Round 14. Richmond versus Brisbane. Richmond, J. Pickering, 1 vote. Richmond, T. Nichols, 2 votes. Richmond, D. Honeybun, 3 votes. Hawthorn versus Geelong. Hawthorn, D. Brereton, 1 vote. Hawthorn, A. Collins, 2 votes. Hawthorn, S. Lawrence, 3 votes. Melbourne versus North Melbourne. North Melbourne, T. Stevens, 1 vote. North Melbourne, B. Ellison, 2 votes. North Melbourne, J. Longmire, 3 votes. Fitzroy versus Essendon. Essendon, G. O'Donnell, 1 vote. Essendon, P. Hamilton, 2 votes. Essendon, D. Buick, 3 votes. St Kilda versus Footscray. Footscray, T. McGuinness, 1 vote. Footscray, P. Foster, 2 votes. Footscray, T. Liberatore, 3 votes. Collingwood versus West Coast. Collingwood, D. Monkhurst, 1 vote. Collingwood, R. McEwen, 2 votes. Collingwood, T. Shaw, 3 votes. Sydney versus Carlton. Carlton, D. Kernahan, 1 vote. Carlton, S. Kernahan, 2 votes. Carlton, J. Madden, 3 votes.
The West Coast Eagles maintained their unbeaten run at home by beating the Saints by 18 points, despite trailing by 44 points at quarter time. More than 76,000 fans turned out to VFL Park to see Collingwood thrash Carlton by 54 points, while North Melbourne kept its finals hopes alive with a 44-point win over the Tigers at the MCG. Last year's premiers Hawthorn was no match for the rampaging Bombers at Princes Park. It was a 75-point massacre, while Footscray sneaked into the 5 for the first time by easing Sydney out by 16 points. At Cardinia Park, Geelong stayed in touch with a 10-point win over the Demons, while the Bears won their 3rd game of the year by outplaying Fitzroy at Carrara.
Round 15. West Coast versus St Kilda. West Coast, C. Mainwaring, 1 vote. St Kilda, S. Lowe, 2 votes. West Coast, K. Langdon, 3 votes. Collingwood versus Carlton. Collingwood, D. Mullane, 1 vote. Collingwood, G. Wright, 2 votes. Collingwood, S. Russell, 3 votes. North Melbourne versus Richmond. North Melbourne, T. Stevens, 1 vote. North Melbourne, W. Swass, 2 votes. North Melbourne, M. Larkin, 3 votes. Hawthorn versus Essendon. Essendon, G. O'Donnell, 1 vote. Essendon, T. Danaher, 2 votes. Essendon, G. Anderson, 3 votes. Geelong versus Melbourne. Geelong, T. Malakalis, 1 vote. Geelong, B. Brownless, 2 votes. Geelong, B. Stoneham, 3 votes. Footscray versus Sydney. Sydney, G. Healy, 1 vote. Footscray, S. Atkins, 2 votes. Sydney, G. John, 3 votes. Brisbane versus Fitzroy. Brisbane, J. Gastev, 1 vote. Brisbane, M. Withers, 2 votes. Brisbane, D. Bain, 3 votes.
The Magpies were chasing their 9th consecutive victory, but to take Essendon's place at the top, they had to survive a last quarter challenge from the Sydney Swans. It was an exciting term, with the two teams booting 15 goals between them. But each time Sydney threatened, Collingwood responded. Melbourne, with only 2 wins from their last 7 matches, seemed down and out against Essendon at Windy Hill. 6 goals behind in the final quarter, the Demons, with full forward Darren Bennett on fire, rallied to score a memorable victory. The other great comeback was Dermot Brereton for the Hawks against Richmond at the MCG. Playing against medical advice, nursing a broken rib, the kid was wonderful, kicking a record 11 goals as Hawthorn charged back into the 5. Footscray lost their place, outclassed by the West Coast Eagles in Perth, whilst the Lions, led by Paul Roos, ended the Cats' hopes at Waverley in a battle to stay in touch with the 5. Carlton made the most of their opportunities to sneak home from St Kilda, and North Melbourne made it 6 wins from their last 7 matches, with a comfortable victory in an uninspiring match against Brisbane at the MCG.
Round 16, West Coast versus Footscray. Footscray, G. Coleman, 1 vote. West Coast, S. Malaxos, 2 votes. West Coast, C. Mainwaring, 3 votes. Fitzroy versus Geelong. Geelong, T. Poole, 1 vote. Fitzroy, D. Kickett, 2 votes. Fitzroy, R. Lyon, 3 votes. Richmond versus Hawthorn. Hawthorn, R. D. Domenico, 1 vote. Hawthorn, G. Nugent, 2 votes. Hawthorn, D. Brereton, 3 votes. Carlton versus St Kilda. Carlton, L. O'Sullivan, 1 vote. Carlton, A. Phillips, 2 votes. Carlton, S. Silvani, 3 votes. Essendon versus Melbourne. Melbourne, P. Road, 1 vote. Melbourne, R. Jackson, 2 votes. Essendon, M. Long, 3 votes. Sydney versus Collingwood. Collingwood, D. Mullane, 1 vote. Sydney, G. John, 2 votes. Collingwood, M. McGuan, 3 votes. North Melbourne versus Brisbane. North Melbourne, I. Fairley, 1 vote. North Melbourne, J. Ramiro, 2 votes. North Melbourne, P. Bryce, 3 votes.
So after 16 rounds, Tony Liberatore still leading on 16, but a number of players getting closer and closer, and we're getting closer to Tony's injury time. We take a break, back with more after this. Back to the Southern Cross, 6 rounds remaining in the 1990 Brownlow Medal. I've just had a look and seen that both Tony Shaw and David Bain were outstanding in rounds 17 to 19. They trail Tony Liberatore at the moment by 4 votes.
Round 17 turned out to be a real percentage builder for Essendon, as they hammered Richmond by 79 points. And that victory was enough to return the Bombers to the top of the AFL ladder. The West Coast Eagles stamped themselves a real finals contender with an emphatic 31-point win over Carlton at Princes Park. Melbourne accounted for the Lions by 19 points, with Todd Viney picking up 32 possessions, in one of his best games for the Demons. Geelong's riches to rags year continued, with John Longmire booting 7. The fast-finishing Roos ran out 21-point victors. The margin was considerably greater at Moorabbin, the Saints whipping the Swans by 75 points. Hawthorn struggled before overcoming a determined Brisbane, while Collingwood and Footscray fought out a thriller at the MCG. Trailing late in the game, Steve Collinwood kicked a miraculous goal for the Dogs. They snuck home by 3 points, and their finals hopes were still alive.
Round 17, Essendon versus Richmond. Essendon, D. Buick, 1 vote. Essendon, G. Anderson, 2 votes. Essendon, G. O'Donnell, 3 votes. Melbourne versus Fitzroy. Melbourne, T. Viney, 1 vote. Fitzroy, M. Aythorn, 2 votes. Melbourne, B. Lovett, 3 votes. Carlton versus West Coast. West Coast, S. Malaxis, 1 vote. Carlton, S. Silvani, 2 votes. West Coast, C. Lewis, 3 votes. Geelong versus North Melbourne. Geelong, D. Troy, 1 vote. North Melbourne, M. Larkin, 2 votes. North Melbourne, J. Chandler, 3 votes. St Kilda versus Sydney. St Kilda, S. Lowe, 1 vote. St Kilda, T. Pekin, 2 votes. St Kilda, R. Harvey, 3 votes. Footscray versus Collingwood. Collingwood, G. Wright, 1 vote. Footscray, L. Cameron, 2 votes. Footscray, T. McGuinness, 3 votes. Brisbane versus Hawthorn. Brisbane, D. Bain, 1 vote. Hawthorn, A. Collins, 2 votes. Brisbane, M. Ashcroft, 3 votes.
The biggest crowd of round 18 was for the Friday night game between North Melbourne and Hawthorn. 44,000 fans saw Hawthorn retain 5th place by withstanding North's big finish to win by 10 points. The Brisbane Bears created an all-time record by dishing out 198 handballs, and even though they restricted Melbourne to 1 second-half goal, they still lost by 13 points. Gary Pert was clearly best on ground for Fitzroy against Richmond, but he was suspended for the first time in his career, one of 4 players outed in a fiery match. Gary Ablett kicked 8 goals, but they weren't enough to prevent Essendon beating Geelong in a thriller by 2 points, while Collingwood thrashed St Kilda. The Sydney Swans lost their 10th game in a row, but fought it out against the Eagles. And Simon Minton-Connell returned from a broken leg to kick 8 goals for a revamped Carlton side against Footscray.
Round 18, North Melbourne versus Hawthorn. Hawthorn, C. Langford, 1 vote. North Melbourne, M. Larkin, 2 votes. Hawthorn, D. Anderson, 3 votes. Melbourne versus Brisbane Bears. Brisbane, M. Leslie, 1 vote. Melbourne, S. Stretch, 2 votes. Brisbane, J. Gastev, 3 votes. Fitzroy versus Richmond. Fitzroy, M. Gale, 1 vote. Fitzroy, D. Collins, 2 votes. Fitzroy, B. Stevens, 3 votes. Geelong versus Essendon. Geelong, G. Ablett, 1 vote. Essendon, G. O'Donnell, 2 votes. Geelong, T. Poole, 3 votes. Collingwood versus St Kilda. Collingwood, S. Kerrison, 1 vote. Collingwood, M. Christian, 2 votes. Collingwood, D. Mullane, 3 votes. Sydney versus West Coast. Sydney, M. Kennedy, 1 vote. Sydney, G. John, 2 votes. West Coast, S. Malaxos, 3 votes. Footscray versus Carlton. Footscray, T. Liberatore, 1 vote. Carlton, S. Minton-Connell, 2 votes. Carlton, S. Silvani, 3 votes.
Round 19 was dominated by the battle for top spot. The Essendon-Collingwood match had been transferred from Windy Hill on Saturday to Waverley on Sunday. And for the first time, a home and away match was pre-sold. The game was a sellout, a situation that led to a live television coverage of the clash in Melbourne. And it was a thriller, played in typical finals fashion. This match had everything, with the Bombers finally holding out to win by a goal. And the West Coast Eagles consolidated their place in the top 3 and the double chance with a big win over Richmond. The upset of the round occurred at Carrara on Saturday night. The Bears, led by Roger Merritt, thrashed the Cats. It was Geelong's 4th consecutive defeat and only the Bears' 2nd win since round 7. Hawthorn made it 4 straight, winning a fiery match against St Kilda. Footscray were too good for Fitzroy in an uninspiring game, whilst Melbourne looked to be on the way back to their best form with an easy victory over Sydney, who slumped into the wooden spoon position.
Round 19, Hawthorn versus St Kilda. Hawthorn, J Platten, 1 vote. Hawthorn, J Kennedy, 2 votes. Hawthorn, S Lawrence, 3 votes. Melbourne versus Sydney. Melbourne, R Jackson, 1 vote. Sydney, G Williams, 2 votes. Melbourne, A Obst, 3 votes. Fitzroy versus Footscray. Footscray, T Liberatore, 1 vote. Footscray, T Wallace, 2 votes. Footscray, S Atkins, 3 votes. Brisbane versus Geelong. Brisbane, D Bain, 1 vote. Brisbane, M Zanotti, 2 votes. Brisbane, R Merritt, 3 votes. Essendon versus Collingwood. Collingwood, M McGuan, 1 vote. Essendon, D Buick, 2 votes. Essendon, G O'Donnell, 3 votes. West Coast versus Richmond. West Coast, D Hart, 1 vote. Richmond, T Nichols, 2 votes. West Coast, G McKenna, 3 votes. North Melbourne versus Carlton. North Melbourne, M Larkin, 1 vote. Carlton, S Silvani, 2 votes. North Melbourne, D Crocker, 3 votes.
Well, thanks very much, Ross. What a fascinating situation now with Tony Liberatore leading on 18 votes. And remember, in 1986, the Big Dipper and Greg Williams won with 17. But Tony didn't play another game in 1990. And Silvani just 2 away on 16. We'll be checking the team and leaders boards after the break. But before that, let's take a look at some of the great high marks of the season. Stewie Lowe took 225 of them, but he wasn't the only one to delight the fans.
G'day. How you doing? Good, thanks. You're off on a golfing holiday, are you? Yeah. I play a bit myself, actually.
Well, high excitement here in the Southern Cross, as you can imagine. Tony Liberatore has won both the Morris Medal and twice the winner of the Gardner Medal. Will he win the Brownlow Medal? Let's have a look at the team leaderboards. We start with Brisbane, and David Bain still well in contention. Remembering 3 rounds to go, 9 the maximum. Liberatore leading with 18. So Bain on 14 for Brisbane. We go to Carlton. Stephen Silvani with a rush at 16. Certainly in contention at Collingwood. Number of players polling well. Are they too far back? Shaw on 12, Wright 11, McGuan 10, Dacos 9. At Essendon, The front runner, Paul Salmon, who's been stuck on 11 for a while, and Greg Anderson, maybe he's run out of time. He had a sensational round 22. Gary O'Donnell on 10. At Fitzroy, leader there is Ross Lyon on 8, so nobody there really in contention. At Footscray, and this is where most of the action has been tonight, Tony Liberatore on 18, and Tony McGuinness finished the season very well, and he has 13. At Geelong, they provided the winner last year, Bill Brownlow. Well, he was on 12 4 or 5 rounds ago and hasn't moved. We go to Hawthorn. Andy Collins 12 and John Platten 11, a couple of their smaller players there. At Melbourne, both Bennett and Lovett have done well. Lovett on 12, still with some hope, Bennett with 9. At North Melbourne, John Longmire with 9, Matty Larkin with 9. They look too far back. Richmond, Trent Nichols on 10 and Tim Powell 7. At St Kilda, Stewie Lowe the favourite there. As far as the Saints were concerned, he has 12, and Paul Harding, who went very well in the middle, with 9. At Sydney, Graham John was 7, so no one really there. And at the West Coast Eagles, the leader there on 11 is their captain, Steve Malaxos, with Chris Mainwaring and Guy McKenna, both on 7, Dwayne Lamb at 6. Here's the leaders board. Tony Liberatore, 18. Stephen Silvani, 16. David Bain, 14. Tony McGuinness, 13. Shaw, Brownless, Lovett and Lowe, 12. Well, the tension's almost unbearable. Let's go to round 20.
Round 20 opened with what was billed as the Battle of the Wooden Spoon. At one stage, the Brisbane Bears led by 22 points, but the Swans stormed home to victory with a 7-goal last quarter at the SCG. It was vintage Hawthorn at league headquarters when they demolished a disappointing Collingwood by 83 points. The Hawks led at every change, with spearhead Jason Dunstall booting 11. For the second time this year, the Blues outplayed the Bombers. At the final bell, it was a 20-point margin, and skipper Stephen Kernahan was devastating at full forward. North's John Longmire kicked 6 to help the Shinboners get over a determined Footscray at the Western Oval. And St Kilda, in a nail-biting finish at Moorabbin, managed to pinch a 1-point win over a gallant Fitzroy. But the man that stole the show was Geelong's Gary Ablett with 12 goals. The Super Cat was the difference between both sides, overwhelming Richmond by 64 points. And to close proceedings, Melbourne defied the odds and ended the Eagles' winning run at home. The Demons were emphatic in their 63-point win.
Round 20. Sydney versus Brisbane. Brisbane, A. Yashenko, 1 vote. Sydney, G. Williams, 2 votes. Sydney, M. Eustace, 3 votes. Hawthorn versus Collingwood. Hawthorn, J. Morrissey, 1 vote. Hawthorn, P. Hudson, 2 votes. Hawthorn, J. Dunstall, 3 votes. Richmond versus Geelong. Richmond, C. Lambert, 1 vote. Geelong, K. Hinkley, 2 votes. Geelong, G. Ablett, 3 votes. Carlton versus Essendon. Carlton, M. Hanna, 1 vote. Carlton, J. Madden, 2 votes. Essendon, D. Buick, 3 votes. St Kilda versus Fitzroy. St Kilda, L. Donald, 1 vote. Fitzroy, B. Stevens, 2 votes. St Kilda, G. Laurie, 3 votes. Footscray versus North Melbourne. Footscray, T. McGuinness, 1 vote. North Melbourne, D. Crocker, 2 votes. Footscray, G. Coleman, 3 votes. West Coast versus Melbourne. Melbourne, A. Obst, 1 vote. Melbourne, J. Steins, 2 votes. Melbourne, B. Lovett, 3 votes.
The round opened under lights at the MCG, with North Melbourne blitzing an undermanned St Kilda to win by 92 points. McCarthy finishing with 8 goals. Hawthorn took its 6th game straight with a bruising 31-point win over Carlton, a game that saw a vicious all-in brawl from which there were no reports. Melbourne met Richmond for the first time at Waverley and won by 6 goals, while Collingwood got back on the winning list by slaughtering Fitzroy at Victoria Park. The Bombers were methodical in overpowering Footscray at Windy Hill, while the Eagles had few problems with the Bears at Carrara. The upset of the round was Geelong going down by 2 points in a thriller to the Sydney Swans at Cardinia Park.
Round 21. North Melbourne versus St Kilda. North Melbourne, A. Rock, 1 vote. North Melbourne, W. Carey, 2 votes. North Melbourne, J. McCarthy, 3 votes. Richmond versus Melbourne. Melbourne, S. Eichel, 1 vote. Melbourne, E. Spalding, 2 votes. Melbourne, G. Lyon, 3 votes. Hawthorn versus Carlton. Hawthorn, C. Whitman, 1 vote. Hawthorn, G. Ayres, 2 votes. Hawthorn, A. Collins, 3 votes. Geelong versus Sydney. Sydney, B. Toohey, 1 vote. Sydney, D. Carroll, 2 votes. Geelong, M. Mansfield, 3 votes. Essendon versus Footscray. Essendon, T. Danaher, 1 vote. Footscray, G. Coleman, 2 votes. Essendon, D. Grenvold, 3 votes. Collingwood versus Fitzroy. Collingwood, T. Shaw, 1 vote. Collingwood, S. Morwood, 2 votes. Collingwood, G. Wright, 3 votes. Brisbane versus the West Coast. Brisbane, D. Bain, 1 vote. West Coast, C. Turley, 2 votes. West Coast, C. Lewis, 3 votes.
The final 5 was well and truly decided coming into the last round of the home and away matches, but positions within the 5 were wide open. Essendon retained top spot with a convincing 35-point win over St Kilda at Moorabbin. That game was a memorable one for the Danaher family, with all 4 brothers participating. The West Coast Eagles held on to the double chance, winning a thriller at Cardinia Park over Geelong by 7 points. Melbourne won a psychological battle against Hawthorn just a week prior to the elimination final. Collingwood ended its home and away campaign on a high, thrashing the much-improved North by 89 points. Fitzroy also finished the season on an optimistic note with a gutsy 12-point win over Carlton. Richmond showed a glimmer of hope for the future with a 30-point win over Sydney at the SCG, while Wooden Spooners Brisbane went down to Footscray by 21 points.
Round 22. North Melbourne versus Collingwood. Collingwood, T. Francis, 1 vote. Collingwood, S. Morwood, 2 votes. Collingwood, G. Wright, 3 votes. Melbourne versus Hawthorn. Melbourne, D. Bennett, 1 vote. Melbourne, R. Jackson, 2 votes. Melbourne, G. Lyon, 3 votes. St Kilda versus Essendon. Essendon, D. Grenvold, 1 vote. Essendon, D. Buick, 2 votes. Essendon, G. Anderson, 3 votes. Footscray versus Brisbane. Brisbane, M. Richardson, 1 vote. Footscray, L. Cameron, 2 votes. Footscray, T. Wallace, 3 votes. Geelong versus West Coast. West Coast, C. Mainwaring, 1 vote. Geelong, K. Hinkley, 2 votes. West Coast, C. Lewis, 3 votes. Sydney versus Richmond. Richmond, M. Mitchell, 1 vote. Richmond, S. Ryan, 2 votes. Richmond, C. Lambert, 3 votes. Fitzroy versus Carlton. Fitzroy, S. Clayton, 1 vote. Fitzroy, B. Stevens, 2 votes. Fitzroy, D. Whirling, 3 votes. The winner of the 1990 Brownlow Medal is Tony Liberatore, Footscray.
What a magnificent year it's been for Footscray. They have come back from the dead, and surely this is going to be one of the most popular Brownlow Medal winners in the history of the game. One of the smallest, if not the smallest player in the AFL. And it might take him a while to get up here because he's still recovering from an operation.
Well, Tony, this is a very proud moment for you and for Footscray. After a pretty tough summer and a magnificent year of recovery for the club, to now have one of its players to win the Brownlow Medal is a great achievement. Tony, I've got great pleasure in presenting you with the Brownlow Medal for 1990.
Well, Comic Court went to the front of the Melbourne Cup 7 furlongs from home. Gee, you were in front a long way out, weren't you?
I felt a little bit like Bo Rowe.
Well, he's a fighter and so are you, Tony. What a year for Footscray.
It's just been fantastic. You know, the work that every single person from the Western Suburbs and the people at the football club has just been fantastic.
I reckon even years are pretty good for you. You won the Morrish Medal in 1984, the Gardner in 86, the Gardner in 88 and now the Brownlow in 1990. Well, Tony, they reckon I'm pretty good at stats, but I don't think anyone's ever done that before, do you?
No, I don't.
Who do you want to thank?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank my mother and father who have just supported me all the way through football. My fiancée, Jane O'Donnell, for all the support she's given me. I'd also like to thank every single Footscray footballer who's helped me so much during the year. I'd especially like to thank Peter Gordon, the president of the football club, who put Footscray back where it belonged. I'd also like to thank Terry Wheeler for his efforts in resurrecting our side this year and helping me and believing in me as a league footballer. I've been really thankful for that. I'd also like to say thank you to the people from the Western Suburbs who've backed us all the way and, you know, just really put Footscray back on the map, and it's just been a great effort all around.
Well, Tony, did you ever think that you'd played your last game for Footscray about 12 months ago?
I probably was at the back of my mind, but I always believe, you know, in anything you do in life, if you persevere and, you know, you just give it all you got and just keep on working. And, you know, like at the start of the year, I walked up to Terry and I didn't even make the night match squads. And I was really thinking about going in the internal draft, and that day Terry said to me, you know, like, we're playing against Collingwood in a practice match down at the base, and then, you know, we've picked you for this match. And I thought, well, just through the love of Footscray and all my mates down there, I thought to myself, well, I'll stick it out for another year. And I spoke to Dougie Hawkins, and he really convinced me to stay. And, I mean, it just goes to show, like, you know, like football, you know, like playing at league level, you know, you're on the fence, and it just goes to show, like, guys who are probably aren't really good enough or on the board of playing senior football, you know, sometimes when they get an opportunity, they really play well, you know, and that's what I think it's happened to me.
Congratulations, well done. Magnificent. Well, Ross, I think it's our time to toast the winner of the 1990 Brownlow Medal.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you charge your glasses and be upstanding? I think on this occasion it's appropriate to say to Footscray and to Tony Liberatore. Well done. Cheers.
And as we go to a commercial break, let's have 3 cheers for Tony Liberatore, the winner of the 1990 Brownlow Medal. Hip hip! Hip hip! Hip hip!
Theirs was a
Ronce just advanced at Airlines and 1 week's accommodation, so that'll make it just a little sweeter and help him to recover from that injury. One of the most popular winners, I think, ever in the history of the Brownlow Medal, Tony Liberatore, who hung on so gamely, just like he plays the game, on 18 votes. OK, let's have a look at the teams and your favourite players and just how they went. Brisbane, well, David Bain didn't let anybody down with 15 votes. He did particularly well, the former Sandover medalist, Zanotti and Merritt both on 5. To Carlton and Steve Silvani, so close, on 16. Justin Madenate, Craig Bradley on 6 with Bassett. To Collingwood and Graham Wright, who came with a rush at the end with those 3 votes in round 22 with 17. Tony Shaw 13 and Mick McGuan 10. And of course those players are now looking forward to the grand final in a fortnight's time. At Essendon, Darren Buick, who was one of the better players on Sunday, 13, along with Greg Anderson. Paul Salmon was on 11 very early in the season, and Gary O'Donnell on 10. To Footscray, or Fitzroy firstly, shouldn't jump the gun there. Ross Lyon and Brett Stevens both with 8, the leaders there, but nobody polling particularly well. To Footscray, where most of the action has been throughout the night, Tony Liberatore on 18, Tony McGuinness on 14, Leon Cameron, the rookie, on 10, and Terry Wallace again polling well with 10 votes, and Glenn Coleman with 9. To Geelong, Billy Brownless with 12, Andrew Buse 7, and Gary Ablett with 5 for the Cats. We go from Geelong to Hawthorn. Andy Collins 15 and John Platten 11. Platten doing well, and so Collins. He was one of the favourites there. From the Hawks to the Demons, Brett Lovett, who was pretty close with a round or 2 to go with 15, and Darren Bennett, who's had a brilliant season at full forward with 10. To North Melbourne, John Longmire, the man who was back right around Australia today, finished with 9 with Matty Larkin on 9 and Crocker on 8. To Richmond, Nichols 10, Powell 7, Mitchell and Lambert 6 each. So from the Tigers, we go to St Kilda, Stewie Lowe, 225 marks this season, 12 Brownlow Medal votes, Paul Harding on 9 and Brett Bowie on 7. To the Sydney Swans and Gareth John, Greg Williams both on 7 and Carroll on 6, and West Coast, who have got a very big game in front of them on Saturday, Steve Malaxos on 11 and Chris Lewis on 9. So we go to the final leaderboard on what's been a great night for the Brownlow Medal, and Tony Liberatore with 18. Winning from 1 from Graham Wright with 17, Stu Silvani 16, Brett Lovett, Andy Collins, David Bain each with 15, Tony McGuinness with 14, so 2 Footscray players on the opening sheet there. Tony Shaw 13 as we go to the second page. He was along with Buick of Essendon and Greg Anderson, who was the favourite before tonight, with 13, Bill Brownless with 12, Stewie Lowe 12, Paul Salmon, Steve Malaxos, John Platten and Mick McGuan. So Tony Liberatore, the winner of the 1990 Brownlow Medal. Well, there's a saying in racing, and Tony mentioned Vo Rogue, that you should back the first horse you see. And when I came into the room tonight, I met Tony Liberatore in the lift coming in, and he was the first person I saw, so I should have had something on him. Hope you've enjoyed it at home. It's been a great night here, a wonderful atmosphere, and I think everybody agrees that Tony Liberatore is one of the most popular winners in the history of the Brownlow Medal, the champion of 1990.
Good running by the Bulldogs. The hand pass Colin gives to Liberatore. His second goal for the quarter is home. Short pass gone. Liberatore will run up to the and should goal. Tony Liberatore does goal. He kicks his third.
That's a hand pass out. Grant showing speed. Liberatore, that shot. Dunlop, good tackle by Wallace. Liberatore, snapshot.
Liberatore going to get there. Cleverly done by Lillard. One spot. Tony hits for goal. And he puts it through. And there's a chance for Malacus. Liberatore gets it.
again, Liberatore. Left foot by Liberatore, and he has put it through.
This has been a 7 Sport presentation for the Australian Television Network.